been a long, arduous journey, but I do remember when everything stopped. When the world stopped, when classes ceased, but we continued. I remember when COD closed down and all my classes went online. What you saw there, it was the use of a flashback. Flashbacks have been around for quite a long time, longer than we may think. It was first incorporated by D.W. Griffith, and he referred to it as a switchback to help create a story. It was rarely used in the 1920s. Many people saw it as a cop out, so many filmmakers at the time decided not to use it. But over time, about 10 years later, in the 1930s and the 1940s, it became the Hollywood standard to use a flashback in a film. We saw this in Wuthering Heights with William Wyler's, such as well Citizen Kane, using different POVs and the use of the snow and the close-ups of his name at the start of the film.
Be careful, Charles. Pull your muffler around your neck, Charles.
We also saw this in Casablanca, as the main protagonist sits there with a cigarette in hand and a drink by his side as he fades in to an old shot of him in Paris, telling us about his love story. Most films used a track in or a track out in order to initiate a flashback. Close ups were often used as well, such as the close up with Citizen Kane's name. Many a times, it was a cross dissolve to tell the viewer that a flashback was about to happen. Most of the time, filmmakers used clear visual means in order to tell the audience that a flashback was about to come. Nowadays, in present time, it can come whenever. It'll come out of nowhere. The viewer won't know until it is later explained, or even after a second viewing, if the film doesn't tell itself. But old habits die hard, and in the 1995 The Usual Suspects, the main protagonist is sitting there, telling and reminiscing about a certain time. Begins to close in on his face, and then it cuts to very choppy, bright, orange saturated footage. And this was the film's way of using a flashback. Sometimes even the filmmaker itself doesn't want to use any of the ways, so they just flat out tell the viewer using a time card and reverting it back to an older time to tell the viewer that a flashback is happening. There's a plethora of types most don't see, and types that many see. But there's a common few. There's the testimonial, where the protagonist or antagonist will go back in their history using a cross dissolve or flashback in order to give some backstory as to what happened. Sometimes it's conversational, such as with Forrest Gump sitting at the bench talking about Bubba Shrimp and telling about it. Sometimes it's object triggered, such as with Citizen Kane and the sled called Rosebud. The entire movie itself runs around the premise of telling about Rosebud and what those final words meant. Come to find out, it's the sled. And we only learn about this at the end of the movie when it's thrown into the fire, explaining everything. Sometimes it's a thought, and we travel alongside with the character into his thoughts to learn about his past. Most of the time, a flashback is meant for a backstory. It's to give the viewer some context as to what is happening in the film, first of all. Because sometimes the movie can be very convoluting and very difficult to understand for many viewers. We don't all have PhDs. In movies, sometimes it gives competing ideas as to what's going on, such as Rashomon, where it gives different points of views from each person, from the princess to the bandit and to the lumberjack. Lumberjack? I don't know his name, it'll have to do. Many a times, a backstory is used to solve a mystery. The filmmaker himself will give the viewer different flashbacks at different random times in order for the viewer himself to piece together and stitch together what happened. With flashbacks coming out of nowhere, such as with Manchester by the Sea, I could sit here and tell you all day that I can explain that movie in detail, but I just can't. So I will let someone else explain. This is a video made by The Take on February 24th, 2017. I will put full links down in the description so that you can check out the video for yourself. I will let them explain more about how flashbacks were used in Manchester by the Sea.
The Sea liberally uses these unannounced flashbacks. It opens with one, with Casey Affleck's Lee Chandler and his nephew, the young Patrick, engaging in playful banter on a boat. Back in the present, when Lee takes the elevator down to see the body of his brother Joe, we flash back to the time when Joe was first diagnosed with a heart condition. By setting the two scenes in the same building but years apart, Lonergan makes us wonder for a moment if we've misunderstood to think that Joe's died. Lee is going down in the elevator, and then he's in a hospital room with the still alive Joe. Then we notice that the doctor, Dr. Bethany, was referenced in the earlier scene as being on maternity leave.
Oh, she's on maternity leave here.
And when we return back to the elevator, we understand clearly that we've just seen a flashback.
But, such as in that movie, it keeps the fluidity of time. It makes sure that everything is fluid, not everything is static at once, or it comes at once. It keeps it in motion. Flashbacks can come in many ways. I've talked about one, such as Across Dissolve, but there are two that are most universally known. Across Dissolve, where if I'm standing here and I'm talking about something and I want to reminisce on a certain time, a time when I was over there, Across Dissolve will happen just like this. And now we're in the past. Now this is me remembering the time I was sitting over here on this side. It's weird, but it's a clear visual indication that a flashback did just occur, and the filmmaker is not trying to mess with you. And then it'll cut back to when I was back over here. Now I'm sitting over here. It's kind of quirky and weird that I'm saying it like this, but that's what has to be done. Sometimes it's a different way, a different editing form of a flash to white. Now, the flash to white, it's sometimes cartoonish, sometimes weird, but it's used a lot of times. For some, it's the most universally known. Why that is, I don't know. But it'll flash to white, and now I'm back here. It's weird and it's odd, but now I'm here. And then it'll flash to white again. And now I'm back over here. Flashbacks have been used a plethora of times in movies, and we see it almost in every. But flashbacks themselves, they've changed and evolved over time, just like filmmaking itself. While many do see it as a cop-out, it's more than that. It's an art form. It's a way for the filmmaker himself to go back in time, to give context that cannot be given in present time. While many would think, flashbacks will continue to evolve with filmmaking. And soon, I hope this video will help show flashbacks will soon be evolving and hope that you notice more and the techniques used with films to come.